Communication lines in Pripyat were cut to stop the spread of panic. Despite the radiation risk, the 1st May parade in Kiev went ahead as planned. Once the evacuation was completed, Pripyat was essentially sealed off. Shops were emptied and their contents destroyed. The sacrifices made by the Liquidators were immense. Ananenko believes that over 40,000 of his comrades died within a decade due to the effects of radiation exposure. Hello guys, today we're going to talk about Alexei Ananenko's memories for the last time, at least for a longer period. I know you'd like to know more, especially from a first-hand perspective of Alexei, but it's a good moment to move on to the next subjects. But let's not go into the future too much and focus on this episode, which will be, if I may say, very intimate and even extremely sad and infuriating at the same time. We will talk about the Liquidators and the evacuation of Pripyat, which are touchy subjects. Not to keep you waiting for too long, let's start. Chernobyl Divers. The Man Behind the Myth. Part 6. The evacuation of Pripyat. After the disaster struck, the situation in Pripyat was chaotic and frightening. The scale and severity of the accident caught authorities completely off guard. They made efforts to cover up the extent of the disaster, likely to prevent mass panic. But I think it was done not to show the rest of the world that the USSR's nuclear energy program is completely unpredictable. There were no provisions in place for an accident of such magnitude, and the initial response was driven more by caution than informed scientific judgment. Political pressures compounded the situation, influenced by public perception of the radiation danger. For instance, despite the radiation risk, the 1st May parade in Kiev went ahead as planned, and communication lines in Pripyat were cut to stop the spread of panic. And remember that Kiev lies only about 100 kilometers south of Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Pripyat, the Atomgrad located 3 to 4 kilometers away from the power plant, was initially spared severe contamination by the release of radionuclides. Yet, it quickly became uninhabitable due to the magnitude of the disaster and the weather that carried the radioactive particles hundreds of kilometers away. Most residents of Pripyat didn't have personal phones. Only a few high-ranking officials had access to them. But in the aftermath of the explosion, all phone lines were severed, isolating the city. They even resorted to offering monetary incentives for people to evacuate because many didn't grasp the severity of the situation. Late on April 26th, a decision was made to evacuate the town. Alexei said a lot about the unpreparedness and lack of proper information even on that side of the disaster. Before the evacuation happened, on April 27th, the buses were stationed on the bridge just downwind from Reactor 4, exposing both the drivers and the buses to high doses of radiation. The next morning, the same contaminated buses were used to evacuate people without any warning about the radiation exposure. The evacuation started at 2 p.m, and it commenced swiftly, removing all residents in about 2.5 hours. This sudden evacuation, affecting approximately 135,000 people, was a logistical challenge amidst the unfolding crisis. Once it was completed, Pripyat was essentially sealed off. Shops were emptied and their contents destroyed. Ananenko and his colleagues, a group of workers from the power plant, found an apartment on the upper floors of a building and stayed there briefly while they began responding to the disaster. The elevators were already out of service, so they had to navigate the stairs constantly. Meanwhile, they were told that a safer location had been prepared for them, far away. When it was time to leave Pripyat, they had to travel light. Large items were not allowed, But Alexei managed to take his TV set, an item he had spent a lot on and didn't want to abandon. Everything was checked for radiation, and anything above the acceptable limit was discarded. Ananenko recalls people returning to retrieve their belongings. With the elevators still out of service, they would climb the stairs, have one last drink in their homes, and then throw their possessions out of the windows, wrapped in bed linen. Unfortunately, looting became an issue. It's unclear how the looters managed to get the stolen items out of the exclusion zone, likely through bribes or forest routes. In the aftermath of the evacuation, measures to mitigate radiation exposure were implemented across the region. Decontamination efforts, including washing buildings, cleaning residential areas, and removing contaminated soil, were undertaken by military personnel under strenuous conditions. Despite these efforts, the effectiveness of countermeasures outside the 30-kilometer zone was limited, exacerbating the challenges faced by those involved in containment and cleanup operations. The looters I just mentioned must have suffered severe consequences due to radiation exposure, as they likely didn't check anything for contamination. Liquidators and their sacrifices. Following the evacuation, Alexei became part of the extraordinary effort to contain the radioactive contamination. All those people involved are known today as the Liquidators. Their numbers are still a part of an international discussion, yet it is estimated that there were about 700,000 men involved. That includes miners, soldiers, firefighters, drivers, conscripts, scientists, doctors, nurses, and many others. Their mission was to liquidate or neutralize the radiation released by the Chernobyl nuclear accident. The selfless endeavor was unprecedented in scale and risks. As Ananenko recalls, the work of liquidators was grueling and hazardous. They faced extraordinary levels of radiation exposure as they worked tirelessly to prevent further catastrophic consequences. Many of them, like Ivan, a firefighter and liquidator, witnessed the immediate aftermath firsthand. He recalls the harrowing moments. After about 40-50 minutes of fighting the fires, there were 2 more explosions. There was a big black cloud, followed by an intense blue light. Then was followed by a ball of fire which covered the moon. I felt sick and fell unconscious. I woke up in the hospital in Moscow with dozens of other firefighters. At first, we joked about radiation. Then we heard a comrade had begun to bleed from his nose and mouth. Soon, his body turned black, and he died. That was the end of the laughter. Igor, another liquidator involved in the evacuation and decontamination efforts, vividly remembers the challenges faced. We were told not to have children for 5 years because of our work. How do you explain that to your wife or girlfriend? Most of us didn't, and we hoped we would be alright. We had to remove the top layers of soil and load it up on trucks. I thought the burial dams would be complicated engineering places, but they were like open pits, not even lined with anything. We lifted out the topsoil in one big roll, like a carpet, with all the worms and bugs and spiders inside. But you can't skin the whole country. You can't take everything that lives inside the earth. For 3 years after the disaster, Ananenko worked as a liquidator, part of this massive effort involving hundreds of thousands of people tasked with containing the contamination. Their camp was called the Skazoczni summer camp near Pripyat, which was quickly adapted to house them even though it was initially meant for children. Every day, upon returning to the camp, they underwent rigorous radiation checks. Any contaminated clothing was discarded and they changed into the new protective gear sourced from various power plants. They spent their evenings on a bench at the camp entrance, removing and disposing of any dirty clothes before heading inside to sleep. As time went on, The camp itself became contaminated, and they were moved to ships docked in the harbor, brought in from different parts of the Soviet Union. Life on these ships was tough. Their days started early with breakfast and iodine pills, before donning protective suits and masks. They traveled to the plant in buses, changing them near the plant to minimize the contamination spread. The legendary story of the three men, including Ananenko who entered the flooded basement to locate and turn off critical valves, has been romanticized over the years. Contrary to some reports, they did not die shortly after the mission. However, the risk they faced was real, and they were aware of the potential consequences. The sacrifices made by liquidators were immense. Ananenko believes that over 40,000 of his comrades died within a decade due to effects of the radiation exposure. Many more continue to suffer from disabilities and health issues today, if they lived so long. Despite being hailed as heroes in 1986, the liquidators have since been forgotten by many. Their ill health dismissed by authorities unwilling to acknowledge the true extent of their sacrifice. Depending on the sources, over 700,000 liquidators were eventually involved in the cleanup, working tirelessly to mitigate both the immediate and long-term effects of the disaster. Many paid the ultimate price for their bravery and dedication. Their sacrifices, alongside the heroism displayed during those initial critical moments, should never be forgotten. Today was a bit different episode, right? I read every interview with Alexei I have found, even some in Cyrillic, though I'm not very proficient with it. I tried to write it as Ananenko would have described it to a single person he spoke to on a bus trip, for example. I wanted to make it personal and kind of intimate. I hope that this episode gave you a better perspective on how the USSR treated the heroes that we owe our lives to. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will try to answer them all. And keep your fingers crossed for the next few days. Maybe I will be able to prepare 2 or 3 additional videos each week for a month. That's it for today, guys. Take care, stay safe, and see you next week.